Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's session on PDD and PPD. Thank you all for joining. Whether you're preparing for the ARE divisions or the CSC, we're here to help you succeed. So let's go ahead and get started with a few reminders. Please only unmute when you're called upon by the moderator. You can also leave questions in the chat box. I'm Justine Weigel. I'm a licensing advisor with AIA California, and I'll be checking the Q&A as we go along, so feel free to drop questions in the chat. Keep your questions relevant to topic at hand and do not ask questions or share information that would violate NCARB's ARE candidate agreement. And finally, AIA California strongly encourages attendees to be constructive in their comments and questions to the presenters and to one another to ensure we have a session that is productive and an environment that is a positive learning experience for everyone. Before we get into tonight's session, let's just take a moment to congratulate everybody who's passed an exam recently. Congratulations to all these awesome people on the screen who have passed an exam. It's a huge accomplishment, whether it's your first or your last one. Anybody else, if your name is not on here and you've recently passed an exam, go ahead and put it in the chat so we can celebrate you as well. Right, and I will turn it over to Bryn Young, who is our host for this evening. She has been on previous sessions before, so we'd like to welcome her back. Bryn, it's all yours.
Hey guys, how you doing? Where's everyone joining us from tonight? I'd like to see who's here in the chat a little bit. And as you guys are letting me know, my name's Bryn. I'm a licensed architect in California and soon to be Idaho. And I started out my architectural career. I had a residential studio in San Diego, which um, was wonderful and successful and beautiful. But then I ended up transforming or transitioning into helping people like you become licensed architects. So I do that through a bunch of different resources, from free resources to premium resources, YouTube videos. You might see my weird memes and stuff on Instagram. And I have so much fun helping people like you finally get through these exams, become licensed architects, and I've met so many incredible people along the way. So that's what I do now. So nice. Oh yeah, we're all in California, right? From oh, Atlanta. Hi, Monica. I know Monica, San Francisco, Riverside, Redwood City, Austin, SoCal. Nice. And is everybody, well, we know we're here for PPD and PDD. Does anyone have an exam scheduled coming up here? Maybe within the next couple weeks or Saturday. Tracy, that's exciting. October 27th, the 30th. Awesome, exciting. Well, hopefully today's session is a good recap, but also we're going to be talking about acoustics today. Now, of course, acoustics is just one piece of the puzzle with PPD and PDD, but it's also really important not only to pass these exams, but also to be an awesome architect, to design comfortable spaces, spaces that people want to be in. And so we're going to go over some of the basics, but how I'm going to approach this is I'm going to kind of throw a lot at you, but so you'll want to take notes, but I'm also going to give you like a little cheat sheet at the end, like high level things that you need to remember. And then also as I'm going through it, I'm going to talk about how you're going to want to think about it for the exams so that you can really like highlight the key points. And one thing that I do in that's really important to me is trying to make the exam process and the study journey a little bit more enjoyable and fun. And so we have things like interactive games and all like alternative types of resources to help you pass. And the point of that is to help with the retention, to do like a little pattern interrupt to help you remember things a little bit easier. Now, this is a presentation, so it's not as I'm going to say it's a little bit more standard. However, I'll hopefully talk through things, maybe give like some mnemonics or things that can help you remember. So when you're sitting in there in test day, you've gone through all of the information and now you're having to actually implement that information. You can like maybe tap back into, oh yeah, that's, a little trick or something like that. So hopefully that will help you as we go through it. Again, acoustics can get with anything with PPD and PDD, it can get a little dense, right? But did I share the right screen?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay, perfect. Um, but again, with these exams, you kind of have to know a lot about a lot. So understanding as you're listening to these things, instead of just memorizing like STC rating, for example, try to really think and remember what it means. Like, what's the point? Like, why do I even need to know that? Because as you know, these exams are more about really knowing the information rather than just regurgitating information. So again, I'm Bryn. Be Young Design is my company. You can find me anywhere with Be Young Design. We're going to be talking about architectural acoustics. And this is going to show up in PPD in terms of environmental quality, and then also PDD, like your details, your assemblies, understanding when you might need one detail or assembly over another. And also, again, so that you can design awesome spaces in the future. There may be some of these things that you're like, oh yeah, I know that. I took acoustics in school, um, but I would, if you find yourself saying like, oh, I already know that, just remind yourself that every time you hear something, you might hear something in a new way. So you're seeing it or hearing it in a new way that you might not have heard or understood in the past. So just if we're going over anything that you want to tap out because you're like, I already know this, just remember you can learn it in a new way and it'll just solidify that information even better. So obviously, why are acoustics so important to us architects? I mean, I think we've all been in a space. I actually, I feel like right now my acoustics, uh, I don't have a studio space really designed well for audio, and I'm so hyper aware of my acoustics right now because there's echoing, and all these things. So even so much as a small space and a recording, acoustics can be pivotal. In it can also be a big liability issue, right? Like in somewhere where you need privacy, multifamily housing where you're actually sharing walls, healthcare where you have HIPAA and you have to um, deal with privacy, right? And then there's also other things like an auditorium and making sure that the person in the very back of the room can get the same experience as the person in the very front. There's also performance standards. So there's actually, codes and guidelines, specifically for places like schools or healthcare spaces that set minimum requirements for architects that we have to understand. A big one is like multifamily housing. I designed a lot of ADUs back down in San Diego, and there were certain acoustic requirements for the walls and the floors that were in between an ADU and the main residence. So I had to understand not just, oh, okay, pick this random detail. I had to understand what the best detail would be, how I could, like what the point was, right? Like what's the point of having the STC rating be a certain amount. So you're gonna see these things and you probably already do often in the workplace. Now for the exams, we need to be able to showcase that knowledge. Now, again, the exams aren't going to be like, what's the definition of STC? And if you're taking PPD and PDD, likely this isn't your first rodeo. You get it, but I just always like to re-emphasize that because as we're going through this, it's really understanding the importance of the names and the abbreviations and everything, but how we can utilize that to be great designers. So, what is sound? Again, this might be one of those things where you're like, okay, yeah, whatever. But seriously, it's important because it helps you be able to visualize things like frequency as you are designing and then understanding that, like being able to picture that wavelength in your head as you're designing and be able to figure out how you're going to adjust or accommodate for that to create a really awesome space. So vibration travels as waves. We know that, we know that. But it also needs a medium like air or water or solids to actually create that sound. And it's perceived by human ears as loudness and pitch. And those two are important because the pitch, you could have the same loudness, but different pitches, and it's a very different experience. So there's different qualities of sound that we need to understand, and we need to understand it so that we can know how to handle them in a building. So we have velocity. We know that velocity is speed, right? But in the sound, it's the speed of the sound. And this is going to really be determined based on the medium. So, for example, like air or water or certain materials. For example, if you've been at the beach, you know that there could be people swimming far away, having a very light, normal conversation, and you can hear them way far away. And that's because of the speed that that sound is going to travel on that medium. Now, velocity is not as huge in a building because usually the effects are pretty minimal. Like the velocity isn't going to be super impacted or changed as much, although it could based on different mediums within the space. But it's just important to understand that velocity, how that moves. And then we have frequency. And again, we know from, say, like our trig classes where we had our different waves, the frequency is, it's like going back to those old classes where that's the number of cycles per second, right? So the number of times that wave is going to go through a cycle. And then with the frequency, we have, and we're going to go more into frequency because it really does make a big difference for design because you have a low frequency, mid frequency, high frequency. And a low frequency is going to be something like your traffic or an HVAC rumble. These frequencies are a lot harder to block. So this might look like an exam case study where they give you a site plan and you need to map out the location of um, certain things. For example, maybe like the HVAC system. So where you locate that on a site plan is important because if it has a low frequency, which is harder to block, you're going to want to separate it from, say, a meditation garden, or something like that, where it's not going to be as easy to block or absorb. And then we have the mid frequencies. That's going to be like our typical speech. Uh, and then the high frequencies. This is the clarity of speech, and this is easier to absorb. So higher frequencies are a lot easier to kind of mitigate in terms of a design architecturally because we can, and we'll go into it, but we can add on different materials and stuff that can absorb that sound. And then we have power, how much energy a source actually produces. So this is going to connect to how loud something sounds, which is going to be measured in decibels. And that is going to directly impact the sound isolation and the reverb. So I'm going to go into more of like STC and reverb and those things because that's going to be pretty big for the exam. Human sensitivity to sound. So understanding the different hertz and different levels is going to be important. So just getting like a rough idea, and that's why I like charts. I like different color coordinations. If you use like different color highlighters or something like that, it's helpful just to picture it and remember because human hearing sensitivity is important because it ties into speech intelligibility, into noise control, and those two topics are going to be really important for the exams. So for the ARE, you are expected to know that speech clarity comes from mid-high frequencies. So we talked a little bit about that before. And then again, that low frequencies are the hardest to control. So those are going to need different assemblies than a high frequency, maybe heavier assemblies, airtight construction, mechanical isolation, like I mentioned, like physically isolating it or isolating it in terms of structure, like structurally isolating it. And then high frequencies again can be controlled with those absorptive finishes and whatnot. So um, there's going to be a couple things I'm going to repeat a few times, but hopefully by doing that, it will get it even more so in your head. You'll be able to understand it. So how materials control sound. This is going to be a huge one for us because we're creating buildings that we need to be able to control the sound. So NCARB and the exams and everything, they want you to know what property controls what type of acoustic behavior. Okay, so the three ways that sound acts upon a material is we have transmission, and that's going to be the number three. And that's really sound passing through a partition, transmitting. And that is going to be controlled or governed by, rated by the STC rating. So transmission, you can think transmission, STC, they're connected. And the way that we can improve our STC rating, so if we're improving it, then we're reducing how much sound is transmitting through it, right? And some ways that we can improve it are we can add mass. So that would be like, a CMU wall versus a JIP board or JIP board and like standard studs is going to transmit it differently. Another big one is sealing gaps. And then also staggering studs. So I kind of like to I think of sound sometimes like heat, right? When we're wanting to make sure we have thermal breaks, we want to make sure that there's not continuous materials so that the heat can just go right through. Same thing with sound. We want to make sure that there's enough sound absorbing or dissipating before it's going through. So some of the weak points that can come from transmission, things like doors, penetrations of any sort. Okay, and then we have absorption. Obviously, we know this, absorbing. Sound energy is converted to heat within a material. And this is going to be controlled or governed by, rated by the NRC rating. So I'm going to have more on STC and NRC, but I really want, like, those are the things that you want to remember because those can get confusing of like, what's the difference? What does that even mean? So remember, STC is it's being transmitted, it's going out. NRC is it's being absorbed. So porous, fibrous, thick materials, you can think of acoustic ceiling tiles or fabric or whatnot. There's going to be more absorption for that sound. And then we have reflection. This is the sound bouncing back into the room. This is, the hard, dense, continuous surfaces. So I like to think of an indoor pool that has concrete and glass. You know how loud that space is because that sound is just all reflecting back. You also have a higher velocity because you've got the water. Um, so when you're thinking of reflection, that's what comes to my mind and is that or think of like the loudest space you've been in, all of that coming and reflecting back to you. So here is a little like trick that can come up on your exams is the exams might give you like two walls of the same thickness, for example. And they may ask you which one is better at transmission loss. So the one with so and then they may give you, I don't know, a bunch of different answers, or they might give you visuals or whatnot. But the one with more mass and fewer gaps, or the one with less mass and more gaps? Which one would be best for transmission of sound? Anyone want to guess? Did I ask that? Did I ask that clearly enough? Two walls, same thickness. Which one would be better for transmission loss? More mass, fewer gaps, or less mass, more gaps? Any guesses? Yeah, more mass, fewer gaps, because the gaps is going to let that transmission go through. And I think what trips me up sometimes is like even the word transmission loss. In my brain I'm like, okay, wait, do we want transmission loss? Do we don't want transmission loss? Like loss sounds like a not great thing. I just like I my brain starts going in this thing. So if the transmission through the space is losing, that's good, right? Because we're losing sound. So that's the only way that we have to think about it is if the transmission is losing, then we're losing sound, which is good. So the more mass we have, the fewer gaps we have, the less is able to go through that space, and we're losing more. Okay. It is important that you are able to differentiate different surface effects. So what the different surfaces, the surface properties are going to have on those acoustics. So reflection. I know we just talked about reflection and absorption, but it's just like going a little bit more. Materials with low porosity and the high density, like we talked about the pool room, that's going to have a lot of reflection and it increases the reverberation time. So that's going to make spaces like restaurants or gyms or a pool room sound really loud because it increases that reverb time. So the reverb time is how I have another slide that will go into it, but like, the sound coming back and it dying away or it bouncing around the room. Absorption. Materials with high porosity and fiber orientation absorbs more. And I know I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's, we want to understand low porosity versus high porosity and what's that going to do to an acoustic and how we can adjust our spaces accordingly. So that's going to improve speech clarity and reduces reverb time if we have high absorption. So there might be a question that's like, which finish, and sometimes like if I'm just spitballing, it's like definitely uh, a rudimentary question versus what's going to show up on the exam, but it's still helpful for remembering it. But might be which finish reduces reverberation time in a lecture hall. Or it might be a case study of a lecture hall, and it's talking about certain materials and whatnot in relation to um, reducing reverberation. So if we want to reduce reverberation in a lecture hall, we're going to want to do carpet, acoustic panels, things like that. Uh, Something else like, why does a glass wall lobby sound harsh? And that's, I mean, similar to the pool, right? Because the reflection is off that smooth, dense surface and it's just bouncing right back to you. Nothing's being absorbed or very minimal is being absorbed. Again, you will not get an exam question. I wish as simple as that, but it's a way for you if you get a question, you ask yourself in your head, you could even reword it in your head or something, like re-ask yourself in a more simplistic way like that. Because that's the thing too with these exams. Sometimes the way they're worded, they actually trip you up more than they need to. So sometimes if you bring it back to the basics in your head, it makes it seem so simple. Like you could read this question that seems really overwhelming, then you can start second guessing yourself, getting in your head. But if you stops, take a break, ask yourself again in your head, maybe in a different way, it gets to the simple basics. So remember that as you're going through that and something comes up that trips you up. So let's talk about frequency a little bit. Low frequency sound. Something that could show up on an exam is something like why low frequency noise like traffic or a bass is harder to control. So the thing about low frequency sound is we think about it, because sound is wavelengths, you want to think about it in a wavelength. So low frequency has long wavelengths. And those long wavelengths can actually bend around barriers. So I like this visual because you can see how it can move into a space and it can vibrate assemblies. So if you have, I mean, I mean, just think of riding in your car and you've got like a super awesome song on and you've got it at top sound and or even better, the car next to you is like partying with their super high bass, and your car is basically vibrating because their bass is so intense. So, ordinary partitions like a simple stud wall, with like your typical stud wall with chipboard, it's not going to stop those. And we understand that because we've all been in an experience where we've literally felt that. So some design strategies. So here's the thing with these acoustics. The exam is going to want to know that you know how to address these things? What are design strategies that you can use when these things come up? You are the architect of a new multifamily residence. It's a high end, they've got all the money in the world, but they're very, very specific and they want it to go above code, way beyond code. And they want to make sure it's silent in between the rooms or whatever. So what can you do to do that? So some design strategies you can do for low frequency sound is adding mass, right? We talked about mass before. Things like it doesn't have to always be CMU, but CMU and concrete are a high mass material, so they're just easy to, think about. You can also do multiple layers of chipboard. So if you have designed a back in San Diego, I would design a lot of wood. I mean, I think a lot of the US. We design a lot of wood framed buildings, right? Especially single family residential. We design a lot of wood frame, 5/8 chipboard, basic. Um, but the way that we can do that and increase the STC ratings, the sound, the acoustic control is you can add on more chipboard. So sometimes we would do that is just double up the chipboard. And that just adds more mass. It's not a ton, but it does increase the STC rating, which makes it not transmit as much sound. There's also you can add separations, so staggering studs. You could do there's ways, again, I know, especially when you're working with like developers and stuff, space is everything. So double width walls or things like that might not be, you might not have the flexibility to be able to do that. So things like staggering studs, you can do it where there's, you're not a full wall depth more or a full stud depth more. You're just staggering it a little bit, but just that little bit of stagger creates that break. Again, you can think of like the thermal properties, a similar situation. Um, you can double up stud walls, airspace between layers. Air is very incredible. It's very porous and it absorbs a lot of sound. And so just a little bit of that airspace between the layers, allowing that sound to absorb is important. And then dampening. So resilient channels. Does anyone know what a resilient channels, or can someone explain to me what resilient channel is? I'll give you a second to think, but as we're going through that dampening, there's also acoustic sealants. There's actual sealants. I never ended up using this on a project, but I almost did. There's a sealant that you can do in between chipboard that actually is just a acoustic sealant that absorbs, it creates that barrier. So it's not material on material, and that helps with dampening. And then insulation within cavities, right? Insulation obviously is going to be great for absorbing that sound. So we've done certain rooms where, typically we don't insulate all interior rooms or interior walls, but there are certain rooms, say a movie theater space, a movie, or even like a master bedroom, or what do you call them now? Not master bedroom, primary bedroom. Uh, those walls you may choose to insulate just for that added sound protection. Michael, Tracy, thank you. I'm like, come on, guys, someone give me a resilient channel. Yeah, resilient channels offer a break in your wall assembly to prevent transmission, question mark? Not so sure. A metal channel with one leg that can be added to the face of studs to attach chipboard to. Yeah, green glue. Yes, that was it. That's that acoustical sealant. Even just like researching stuff like this as you're going through the exams, I know sometimes you're like, I don't want to go and do extra, but they're great for projects. Having the acoustic understanding, I designed a studio for a a musician one time, and acoustics were everything. So I went like did an even deeper dive in acoustics to make sure that not only was the space going to create the best music, but also it was in a small lot in residential area. He didn't want to disturb the neighbors. So having this understanding and this knowledge is amazing because it helps you be a great architect. Yeah. So a resilient channel is, and you can look it up, but it's like a little metal channel that almost looks like a little C or something. And it just goes on top of the studs. So it's in between the studs and the chipboard. They usually run it horizontally, and it just creates that gap. So it allows the sound to go in through that chipboard, dissipate through the air or through that barrier, and then reduces that transmission. Okay. Um, okay. All right. So on the flip side, high frequencies. Remember, I mentioned the wave. So your high frequency, that's going to have a shorter wavelength or, much more closer together. Something that this is going to be, important and say a case study or something like that. Again, maybe you're designing a classroom, being able to properly treat or handle speech versus privacy is really important. So your high frequencies, you got that shorter wavelength and they're absorbed easily by that soft porous materials, which is why, people hate carpet, but it makes it, if you go through a space that is, we had a house that when we moved in, we were renting that was all carpet, like minus the bathroom was all carpet. It was gross, but we ended up switching to, or the homeowners switched it to an LVT while we were there, and it was such a difference. Worth it, 100% worth it, but it was such a difference. So people hate carpet, but there's a time and a place for them. Things like acoustic panels, even felt. There's felt panels people can use. That makes a really big difference and it absorbs those high frequencies. And they don't travel as far as low frequencies. So they're shorter wavelength. They're going to be loud, but a little bit more in immediate space and a little bit easier to control. So some design strategies, again, these exams, you really want to be able to understand the design strategies. I feel like I've said it, but those absorptive finishes are huge. But then also using partitions with absorptive surfaces help control the reverb. Oh, my light just went off. Oops, sorry guys. I'm a little darker, but I'm still here. And then sealing cracks and doors. High frequencies leak through small openings. So sealing the cracks and the doors are going to be really important. And on the next two slides, I'm going to show you a little bit more of how those penetrations can make a big difference. Sorry. I got to text my husband to let my cat out of this room because he's mad and scratching at the door. Okay. Okay. I have this question. I'll ask it, even though I think I've said it. Every single one of you will get this right. Okay, are you ready? Which material best reduces speech transmission between offices? I'm not going to give you a list. You can just throw out anything. Oh yeah, Han, thank you for getting that. That's exactly right. That resilient channel. Chipboard. What material will be best at reducing speech transmission between offices? Insulation, chipboard, acoustic ceiling. Okay, let me ask this. Maybe more of you will get this one right. Uh, what would be the worst? Like, what would be the worst? Say you're given a wall assembly and you want to reduce the the speech transmission, and you're given like I don't know, can't think of that. What would be a not good thing? Mass, yes. Openings, yes. Yes, but mass. And that is something that could maybe trip you up in an exam if, say, it's saying we want to reduce transmission, or it might say something else like NRC or STC or something else, but you're wanting to reduce transmission, and then it gives you a bunch of things, and it says a high mass or adding mass only to this. That might be right in a certain situation, but for this specifically, for a high frequency, so not only do we need to know what high frequency is, we also need to know how to deal with the high frequency. So adding mass only for a high frequency is going to be not as effective. Now, if it's a low frequency, if it's a needing to like add a material to a wall between an office and a what do you call it, HVAC room or a mechanical room, what would that be? Adding mass to that could be effective because it's that low frequency. Okay, so I hope that helps. And for context, so speech privacy, and we'll get into STC ratings, but speech privacy is about 45 for offices. So understanding the different ratings for the different places will be important for you to understand. Okay, so transmission basics, sound moves between spaces, either direct. Does anyone know what flanking path is? A flanking path? Because I realize now that that's maybe not like a normal like word that we would use. So a flanking path is basically like say two outlets back to back. Okay, so it's basically a pathway for sound to move through. Again, heat, it's a easy way for it to move through. So that's what flanking path means if you ever see it. So which wall assembly provides the best sound isolation between two offices? What are some things that you would want to look for? And I kind of just asked this in a little bit of a different way, but yeah, exactly, Fred. So opening sound can pass through. That's that flanking pathway. Space, insulation, staggered walls. Yeah, insulation, yeah, filled cavities, multiple layers of gypboard. These are different things that we would want to think. So mass is heavier walls block more sound, but again, and so when I said in the last one for a high frequency, the trick with that is it's just adding mass isn't going to be the best solution for high frequencies, but mass will help with sound transmission, right? However, if it's a certain type of frequency, you might need to do that mass with something else, okay? Um, a separation, yeah, decoupling layers prevents that transfer of vibration of noise. And then the dampening. So we've got mass, separation, dampening, stiffness. Stiffness is one too. Air tightness. Um, if you are given two barriers of equal weight, the one with less stiffness performs better because it doesn't transfer the vibrations as easily. It actually absorbs it a little bit better. So remember that the less stiff, it actually has better isolation. Okay, transmission loss. The ability of a partition to resist the sound passing through it. The higher the transmission loss, and we talked about this before. I remember I was like, okay, loss, is that good or bad? The higher the transmission loss is the better performance. Okay. And again, we've gone through the different types of ways that we can get that. Absorption, inside, so absorption is going to be an inside room strategy. Okay, so if you're thinking, if something is going to be talking about absorption, we're thinking about inside the room. If I need to control the room I'm in, I want to think about absorbing the sound. If I'm thinking of I want to control the sound in the room next to me, I'm going to be thinking about transmission. Okay, and then um, even a high STC wall can fail if it has cracks, you know, door undercuts, which so many doors do. How do you, I mean, especially when you've got carpet to wood or whatever, and you've got different heights um and whatnot. So a ductwork can affect STC. So we want to be we want to remember that the ways that we can improve acoustic separation between rooms isn't just of higher STC, right? It's also, and also there may be a question or something that wants you to understand, hey, maybe it's a historical space, or I'm in I actually can't physically remodel or rebuild this entire wall, but I need to improve the sound quality between them. What can I do? Ceiling penetrations, um, relocating outlets, even just new door sweeps, things like that can make a big difference for sound. So it doesn't always have to be this like huge thing. So again, a way to not confuse the absorption with the transmission is absorption, I'm controlling the room I'm in. Transmission, it's between those rooms. Okay, sound transmission class, STC. This is going to be important. You want to know the STCs, you want to understand what it means, and you also want to have a rough idea of levels. You don't need to know every single, like, STC1 equals this. No, however, a range of things so you know, okay, is STC 60 different than STC 25 or better, or what am I going to need? How much, another thing is like, how much do I need to improve my current STC rating in order to have an effective change? Like, is adding this material has STC rating of X, and this material or wall assembly has an STC rating of Y. If I add this material to this, is it going to make enough of a difference to that? And a question may come up like that in a budget way. Like, I need to do this. I need my STC rating to be a certain amount, and I have to budget or allocate a certain amount of budget and stuff. Like, is it worth it in the budget to do that? And if it's just such a minimal amount, it might not be worth it. So that's where you really want to understand, is a 3 point difference, does it matter or not? So the higher the STC rating, again, this is transmission, transmitting it through, you're going to have a better wall or partition that's going to block that airborne sound. And again, and so STC, I was saying transmission. Remember, transmission, next room. The STC is going to be a single number rating. It's lab tested. And some example values. We're going to have 25 is going to be like normal speech can easily be heard through. Like 25, nah, no. 35, loud speech is going to be audible, not intelligible. So maybe in certain situations, not a big deal. 45 to 50, this is good for offices and privacy. This is going to make sure that, some of the noise isn't coming through. However, if you're in a residential setting, you're still going to have certain, even loud TV or something like that, that's going to be going through. 55 over, that's going to be more high performance, like theaters, recording studios. I mean, I would say even in certain residential settings as well. Okay, we want to make sure we understand the difference between NRC and STC because I think NCARB really enjoys like testing the difference to make sure you understand what they are and why they're different than one another. So your NRC, this is the noise reduction coefficient. Don't let don't let it trip you up. NRC is inside the room. Okay, remember we talked about transmission and reverberation. The NRC, that's inside the room. STC, that is the sound transmission class. That's between the rooms. Okay. So just easy to remember if you think of it like that. So the NRC is going to measure absorption within that space. And we just talked about STC where, an apartment wall might be 50. NRC, that's absorption between 0.0 and 1. So very different class, very different numbers, quantities. Um, so yeah, so the NRC is within the room. If you were asked like how to increase STC of a wall without changing the thickness, some things that, then you want to, there might be something again where there's a very specific square footage, usable square footage that you need to do. So you want to be able to understand what that STC is and how I can improve that wall without maybe changing thickness. And something like staggered studs you can do depending on what your engineer says, but on the side rather than um, like having two staggered walls, like studs like this rather than like this. Um, resilient channels, I believe those do add a little bit of thickness, but it's pretty minimal. But then ceiling penetrations, like we talked about, moving those outlets. So getting creative. So, but understanding what that STC even means, what it's meaning. It's not talk. So if there was an option for saying ceiling penetrations and then another option for carpet, we would remember that STC is talking about the room next to us. If it was talking about NRC, then we know that it's affecting us in that room. So it would be different. The other thing, there are certain STC ratings, right? And those are done in a lab. One thing to always remember is that a wall rated STC in a lab won't perform the exact same in the field, right? Unless it's in perfect conditions, because there may be unsealed gaps or doors or outlets or continuous ductwork or something like that. So if you ever see FSTC, it's just field STC. And that can be much lower than a lab done STC rating. So just like anything, things in the field may be a little bit different. Okay. I'm sorry, I want to get enough time for some questions. So I only have like 2 slides left. So um, I know it's a lot, but it's also, hopefully I'm reiterating things enough where it's kind of like solidifying in your brain and then you never have to do acoustics again. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, reverb time. RT60. So RT60 is the time it takes sound to decay or, you know, uh, die off by 60 decibels. So this is going to be something reverb time that shows up because there might be a scenario where like a teacher needs to be able to be heard in the back of a classroom or something like that. And so and there's a certain reverb time now or something. And then how do you uh, deal with, or how do you add materials to I don't know, improve it or you know what I mean? To reduce the reverb time. So some targets. And again, the point of the targets for any of this. It's not necessarily just for memorization. It's more just to understand it. So if you're going through these, any of them, even the STC ratings, I recommend not just memorizing, okay, 0.6 to 0.8 seconds. I recommend thinking of that. Okay, what does that actually mean? Okay, if a reverb time is 0.6 to 0.8 seconds, it's short and there's clear speech versus 1.5 to 2 seconds. That's how many seconds is it taking for that sound to come back and reach me? So if it's short, the sound is coming back and reaching you quickly, then it's dying off sooner, right? But if, say, a church, 1.5 to 2 seconds, if that sound is going and taking 2 seconds to die off and go down to 60 decibels, then it's traveling further, right? So that's how I want you to go through any sort of numbers at all for these exams, not just memorizing them, understand. Because now if I just said that, it's much easier to like understand it rather than if I were just, okay, remember 0.6 to 0.8 seconds, under 1 second for officer, you're like, okay, I don't even know what that means, but sure, that's great. So go through it, remember that. So obviously, if it takes more seconds, if there's a higher reverb time, it's going to go further because it's going to take longer to dissipate. Finishes, things like carpet, drapes, panels, decreases the reverb time. Geometry, volume, increases that reverb time. Okay, the last, yeah, I think the last abbreviation I'm going to give you tonight, impact insulation class. Okay, this, we've talked about partitions a lot. This is going to be your floors and your ceilings. So there's still STC ratings for floors and ceilings, but your impact your impact insulation class is measuring that ability to block the sound of walking or furniture or, you know, we've all been in a two-story building or apartment or hotel where you're like, what is that person doing up there? They're like dancing the tango because I can hear them all day. So that what impacts that is the IIC. So the higher IIC, quieter rooms below because you have more insulation. The impact insulation class, more higher insulation. And it's not just insulation, but just a way to remember it. Higher insulation, it's going to be quieter down below. So some strategies to increase that are carpets and pads. Maybe you don't want to do that. So floating floors, resilient underlayment. So a layer of rubber or cork that can really help. And then also ceiling isolation assemblies. So you may get, and maybe more for PDD, but you may get a detail of a wall or a ceiling floor to ceiling assembly between two spaces. And you have to understand what the IIC is or how do you increase the IIC. So you want to understand that that is insulation class, reduce the amount of time going down. Okay, and then quickly for this again, the program of whatever you're doing is really going to dictate your acoustic performance that's needed, whether it's really critical or maybe not super important. So in classrooms, we want to make sure there's short reverb and high absorption for that clarity of speech. For hospitals, speech privacy is critical. So we want to have STC rated partitions, high STC rated partitions, and then maybe even like background noise making to absorb or to diffuse that sound inside of a space. Restaurant, we've all been in a restaurant that's just like you can't even hear the person next to you. So it's huge. Background noise is actually okay in a restaurant, but you need to limit reverb. There needs to be balance. Okay, so um, yeah, we already talked about different STC ratings. So This is for you to just take a screenshot of so that it's like your little cheat sheet. I know I need to change the word cheat sheet because it's not cheating. Reference sheet, study guide. So some essentials and little just ways to remember it so that you can have that like quick, quick reminder when you're studying it, when you are taking your exams. Remember, NRC is inside, that's absorbing. STC, that's between, that's airborne isolation, that's the next room over. IIC, that's impact, the floor assemblies. And then the RT60, the reverb time, that's time. Okay, that's the time that the sound is going to travel. Okay, well, the good news is that I finished on the dot, but I didn't leave the most time for any questions. But does anyone have any questions or anything from me? I have a ton of resources on acoustics. Like I said, I have a full like master class on this. I've done so many deep dives on acoustics. So if you're interested or if you want to go deeper, if you want to, yeah, really go deeper, I have the full acoustics masterclass inside my membership, which is the ABC Club. And actually, I didn't, I'm not like here to promote it, but the rates are going up on October 1st. So I can send a link for you guys if you just want to check it out, see what that's all about. There's also like it covers all 6 divisions. So the content that we have in there is way beyond acoustics, obviously. That's one little piece of the puzzle. But if you have an exam coming up, you want to go through there, we've got practice questions, all that good stuff. Michael, I do believe that they send out the recording, but they can correct me if I'm wrong. And then I'm happy to send the slide deck to Ashley and she can send that out to you or maybe send it with the recording. That's no problem at all.
Yes, this will
Nice.
be posted on the YouTube playlist that we have going on. So as long as you have the link to that, you'll be able to access it.
Perfect. And I can send you, Ashley, that link to the or just the PDF of this slide because I don't have it PDF right now. So
Are there any other questions for Brent before she logs off? I'll reshare the link to the entire group after probably tomorrow or the following day.
awesome. Well, thank you all for taking the time to spend an hour with me talking all about acoustics. We're all nerdy when we can enjoy something like that. And I wish you all the best on your exams, your upcoming exams, and also on your studying and your studying sessions. I know you all are busy and you have lives, and I hope that you're able to find balance with your lives outside of the exams and these exams because it's the best way to go about it. It's the best way to not burn out. And I promise you, you'll get till the end sooner if you can allow yourself that balance too. So thank you all. I appreciate chatting with you all and come hang out with me on Instagram and let me know about your next exam.
Thanks, Bryn. That was a great session.
Thanks all.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.